Hi, in this brief video I want to talk about the Islamic movements in post-war Europe. That's before the Second World War. France, for example, checked nationalists in Tunis and made only a few minor administrative concessions. Now in Morocco the story is more complicated and the maintenance of French supremacy was harder. The old Moroccan resistance to Europe achieved the destruction of a Spanish army at Annual by the Moroccan leader Abd el-Grim in 1921. And this revolt of the Moroccans only ended in 1926 when a joint Franco-Spanish campaign forced him to surrender. He was sent into exile. A modern nationalist movement appeared in the 1930s, and like the rebellion of Abd el-Grim, much of the general agitation of the Arab world at this time, and in 1937 led to fighting with the French. Now, in Algeria there were similar movements, but the most violent resistance to French rule came in Syria. A Syrian congress at Damascus in 1919 petitioned the peace conference for independence. The appeal was ignored because of promises made to France during the First World War. The next Syrian request for a British or American mandate was also set aside. Now the French were awarded the mandate and imposed their rule by force, and after a period of very rough government, in 1925 an insurrection was followed by a French bombardment of Damascus in Syria. A step repeated the following year. No progress was made towards self-government, and in 1936 there was again heavy street fighting and a general strike in Damascus. As for the Islamic Middle East and North Africa, here new pressures were at work. 2 or 3 generations of intellectuals had been shaped by Western education, and a national self-consciousness had spread beyond them to the masses. Now, this made the course of events between the wars very disturbed and complicated. Signs of spreading a sense of common Muslim and Arab interests encouraged nationalist agitators in different areas of North Africa and the Middle East. This tendency was strengthened at the end of the 1930s by Arab opposition to a British plan for the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine. The scheme pregnant with trouble for the future. For example, the example of Ataturk and the nationalism of westernized politicians also cut across the old unity of the faith. The jihad proclaimed by the Ottoman Caliph in 1914 had been largely disregarded. Later, when in 1931 an Islamic convention met at Jerusalem, the Arab delegates held an independent assembly to sign a declaration that the Arab countries were an indivisible whole whose goal should be independence and unification. 1931. On the whole, the Pan-Arab movement did not achieve much, and Great Britain and France, 2 major powers interested in the area, were able to act without interference until Italian and German propaganda and intrigue began to be important in those areas in the late 1930s. And now as for Britain, the gravest British problem was of course Egypt. Egyptian nationalism had been one of the first to appear as an anti-European force. Because of the preoccupation of the British strategists with the Suez Canal, it seemed especially dangerous, yet the deposition of the Khedive and the proclamation of a British protectorate in 1914 was another step in the revolutionising of Egypt and created the first succession problem to arise from the Great War. British control during the war fed the flames, and in 1919 there appeared a new nationalist force, the Wafd, which was for 20 years a bitter opponent of British control. Its leaders were not allowed to go to Versailles to ask for independence in 1919, but were shipped off to Malta to keep them out of the way. From this time, trouble was more or less continuous. Passive resistance, riots, sabotage were all tried in Egypt. The ending of the protectorate in 1922 made no difference because Great Britain still retained controls over the nominally independent Egyptian monarchy. Every opportunity to appeal to world sentiment was used. In 1927, for example, the Egyptian government appealed to the League Economic Conference in Geneva for the abolition of the capitulations. Finally, in 1936, an Anglo-Egyptian treaty made important concessions to the Egyptians, and the violence of the national movement began to decline. 1936. Now, the British garrison remained, however. That in Iraq, where a British mandate had been set up in 1920, also retained its grip on the country. A remarkable instance of policing by Air Force, and was not threatened until 1941. And al-Husseini, the Palestinian guy, created trouble there. But that was only briefly. The British recovered Iraq. Now, the government of Iran, where Reza Khan was carrying out a program of modernization like that of Ataturk, may be also mentioned among Muslim countries which showed no love for Great Britain. So Hitler played with these, Adolf Hitler and Mussolini played with these, and the French collaborators played with the Muslims, who hated the Jews, who hated the West, and they hated America. And by the way, they're still at it.